The ritual. Every evening at 6, the house took a breath. The clock in the hallway, whose chime had slipped a second behind the years, told once and then hesitated, as though deciding whether to continue. The kettle sang on the back burner. Steam wound itself into slow ribbons, touching the ceiling and fading, as if the kitchen were exhaling a prayer. And my grandmother, upright as a pine, steady as the old road, set 4 plates on the dining table that could seat 8. We were 3, Grandma, Dad, and me. We had always been 3, as far as my memory reached. 3 forks, 3 glasses, 3 napkins folded with the sharp pride of paper cranes. 3 chairs pulled out from the long table under the window, where the last light pooled into honey and made the dust dance. And a 4th chair, always the 4th, placed at the head of the table, facing the window, turned just slightly outward like a shoulder angle to greet a guest. No one ever sat in it. At 6, the house held its breath again. Grandma lifted the pot from the stove, a stew or a roast or the kind of soup that was really a confession of what your garden had been that season, and carried it to the table. She moved like a dancer who had learned love as choreography, a turn, a set, a pause, a glance to the window. She laid the ladle on the ceramic spoon rest shaped like a swimming fish. She adjusted the salt. She touched the 4th chair lightly, like patting the shoulder of someone shy. When I was younger, I thought the extra chair was simply a habit. A leftover thought from when there had been more of us, from the photographs on the mantel. The sepia ones where the men squared their shoulders as if to hold up the roof with their posture, the glossy ones where a swarm of cousins blurred into a single, laughing creature. Maybe it was a nod to the past. Maybe it was just a superstition, like throwing salt over your shoulder or not speaking a storm by name. Then I got old enough to ask. Who's the 4th for? I said one evening, chin propped on the heel of my hand, watching Grandma nudge the chair into place. The chair legs made a soft hush on the wooden floor, the sound of a secret practicing its voice. She didn't look at me. She never looked at me when I asked about the chair. Instead, she looked at the window, at the way the evening gathered itself around the old maple outside. The maple's leaves knocked lightly against the glass. Tap. 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 Like knuckles saying, "Are you ready?" "Just in case," she said, and clucked her tongue as if that were the end of it. "In case of what?" I said. "In case of who," she corrected, and carried the bread basket to the table. Dad's spoon paused midair. He was a man whose shoulders bore a weight shaped exactly like work and worry. The lines at the corners of his eyes were maps to back roads, and if you traced them you could find your way to all the things he didn't say. He didn't look at the 4th chair either. "Eat," he said gently. "Before it gets cold." The 4th chair watched the window, I watched the chair. The feeling it gave me was not fear, not exactly. It was a kind of ache. An extra field at the edge of a farm, tilled and watered and waiting season after season, and no seeds ever sown. Why keep tending it? Why keep setting a place no one took? After dinner, I stacked plates in the sink and tried again. Did you always set the extra chair? Even when Dad was little? Grandma rinsed a plate, circled it twice with a sponge, set it in the strainer. "I did," she said. "Did your mother?" Her hands slowed. The water hissed. "No," she said. "She didn't." "So you started it?" She turned the water off and faced me, drying her fingers on a towel. Her eyes were the color of dark tea, black until you looked close and then amber stirred up from the bottom. "I promised," she said. "To who?" "To whom," she corrected gently, as always. After a beat, to someone I loved. She smiled then, faint and quick, the kind of smile that was a flinch away from a wince. The kind of smile that kept secrets from shattering. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the clock tick the house forward into sleep, I pictured the 4th chair under the window, angled just enough to greet a guest who never arrived. And I pictured the door. I pictured the knob turning. I pictured a hand I didn't know resting on the back of the chair the way Grandma's did. "Just in case," I whispered to the dark. "In case of who?" The house didn't answer. It breathed. You can tell when a family is protecting a story. The sound changes. Conversations wear a thicker skin. Words begin to travel in circles and call that a destination. The truth isn't absent, it's sleeping with one eye open. A week after I asked about the chair, I tried a new angle. Why is the chair at the head? I asked as we Saturday, wouldn't a guest sit next to us? Grandma ladled stew, the kind that organized itself into layers, the meat surrendering to the fork, the potatoes agreeing that they had always wanted to be soft, the herbs having a quiet meeting and deciding to be kind. A guest, she said, should be greeted properly. Seated with honor. Dad cleared his throat. He did that when he wanted to speak against something and decided to lean with it instead. Eat, he said again, but his voice had its careful edges on. I looked at the empty chair. Will you be mad if someone else sits there by accident? Mad? Grandma laughed, but her eyes slipped to the window. No. I might just ask them to move. Because you're saving it for someone special. Yes, she said. Who? I asked, the question a tug on a rope that ran down into a well. One day, she said cheerfully, you'll see. I stabbed a potato. Do you know? I asked Dad. His spoon moved from bowl to mouth with the discipline of a church bell. I know that your grandmother has set that chair since I was your age, he said quietly. And that the house is better for it. How can a chair make a house better? I said. Grandma smiled at me with her whole face, which she did when she wanted me to remember something. A chair is a promise, she said. It tells the room that there's room. But there's always room, I said. The house was big, bigger than we needed. The table could seat 8, we were 3 and a ghost of a 4th. The living room could hold a harvest dance. The porch could host a brass band and leave room for a dog to nap under the swing. Grandma shook her head softly. Not in every home, she said. Sometimes the room is small because the hearts are. We make a space to remember to be big. Her words lifted into the air and lingered, like steam above soup, like a hymn held on a last note. I wanted to catch them and suture them to the memory of that night, because later there would be nights when I would need them, when the house would feel smaller and the dark would press in, and I would have to remind myself, we make a space to remember to be big. But I was a kid. I rolled my eyes and said, that's weird, and stuffed my mouth with bread. That is how kids save wisdom for later, they pretend not to hear it. After dinner, I went on an expedition. There are ways to learn what adults won't say directly. You can ask the house. Houses have terrible poker faces. I started with the mantle. Photographs told me what I already knew and what I didn't. My grandparents on the front steps the summer after the war, Grandpa's hair combed with soldierly humility, Grandma's mouth daring the future to try its luck. My father at 9, freckles scattered like a map of islands across his nose, holding a kite string that lifted out of frame as if the kite had decided to become a bird. A baby I didn't know, asleep with the slack-jawed ferocity of infants. The baby's picture had a crease down the middle, as if someone had folded it and unfolded it 100 times, a pocket portrait taken to 100 places and brought back like a pilgrim's stone. Who's this? I called toward the kitchen, where I could hear Grandma scolding a pot for not drying fast enough. Your uncle, she called back. I blinked. Dad didn't have brothers, not that I knew. Where is he? In the past, Grandma said, her voice changed to the kind that ends a conversation. Please don't drip water on the floor when you bring those plates. It's not the floor's fault, it must bear everything. I set the photo back carefully. There are doors you can't force without breaking the frame. I went to the bookshelf and ran my finger over the spines. An old Bible had pages thin as fall leaves. A box of letters sat heavy as a loaf of bread. I eased it out. The top envelope was addressed to my grandfather in a hand like plowed lines, deep and earnest. The return address was a town just over the ridge, the one where the river made a dramatic, foolish bend like it had changed its mind mid-journey. I put the box back. I had learned as much as I dared. Later, when my room had pulled itself around me and the night had settled its weight on the roof, I heard them. Whispers in the kitchen. I slid out of bed and padded down the hall, stopping at the landing where the stairs let you see without being seen. The kitchen door was almost closed. A perfect wedge of light fanned across the hallway floor like a paper boat. "Can't keep it up forever," Dad was saying, his voice low, edges roughened by long days. "I can," Grandma said, and her voice was clean steel. "And I will." "Ma," Dad said, using the name he only used when he was trying to pull her onto his side of a worry. "It's been, time is a sieve," Grandma cut in. "It lets the small things through, catches the heavy ones. Some things are meant to be carried. Silence, the kind that stands between two people and holds their coats while they decide whether to leave or stay." Dad tried again, softer. "It hurts you," he said. "The setting. The waiting. It heals me," she said. "Every night I set a place, and every night I remember that love is not a door you close just because the person is late. I would rather hurt and hope than be fine and forget." I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. The house hummed, sympathetic as a friend. The clock provided background percussion. The fourth chair was out there, under the window, its backplate catching a little of the light and sending it back, a low pulse. "Just in case," I whispered to the dark. But whose case? And why did the word laid in Grandma's mouth feel like a wound? If you want to conjure a ghost, you don't need to light candles or say names into mirrors. You only need an unresolved story and a chair. I began to dream of the fourth place. In the first dream, I entered the dining room and the chair was occupied by shadow. Not a person, not exactly. The air where a person would be was thickened, opalescent, as if the air had decided to try being matter for a while. I circled the table, and wherever I stood, the thickened air followed, the suggestion of a face turning without eyes. When I woke, my heart was fluttering like something caught. In the second dream, the chair sat empty as always, but the space above it had a weight. Grandma came in and placed a plate at the setting, and before the plate touched wood, the heat of a handprint bloomed on the table, a shape like any palm, but when I put my own hand over it, the warmth moved up my fingertips into my veins. I jerked back and woke with pins and needles in my hands. I rubbed them hard until the life returned. In the third dream, the door opened. I didn't see the person come in. What I saw was the window, and in it the reflection of someone tall, water running off a coat, hair slicked down like a black river. Grandma rose from her chair and did something with her face I had never seen. She let it be unguarded. That was when I woke with tears on my cheeks and a yearning that had no clear object, only a direction, toward the door. Dreams are stories your blood tells itself. I didn't tell Grandma about the dreams. I didn't tell Dad about the whispers. I carried them like pennies in my pocket. 2 evenings later, I showed up early for the setting of the table. If the ritual was an incantation, I wanted to learn the words with my eyes. Grandma had already laid down the runner, cream cloth with a border of wheat and poppies stitched by a hand that loved the neatness of regular beauty. She set the plates with a precision that made my chest feel tight, the way something simple can be holy if you do it the same way every day for a long time. Knife to the right, blade in. Fork to the left. Napkin folded, edge facing outward so the person would not have to reach into a fold to find their comfort. Glass above the knife. The fourth place mirrored all that care, but with a difference. The fork and knife were both silver, not stainless steel, so they caught the light differently. Not louder, truer. "Can I help?" I asked. "You are helping," she said, without looking up. "You're watching. And that helps," I said. "It makes me feel less alone in the doing." I stood beside her and tried to match the rhythm of her hands with my breathing. It was like being at the ocean. Once you joined the pulse, your body stopped thrashing and started to float. "Why silver for that place?" I asked, after a while. "Because the person is old enough to know the difference," she said. "Old?" I said, pouncing on the crumb. "So it is for someone old?" She set a glass and paused, as if listening to the kitchen. "Old is a kind of distance," she said. Sometimes it's measured in years. Sometimes in miles. Sometimes in decisions you wish you could gather back. Did someone go far away? I said. She picked up the salt cellar and set it at the center of the table. Yes, she said. And I keep a light in the window, and a chair under it, so that even if they don't know the way home, the home will know the way to them. Is it Dad's brother? I said, daring the door that had been closed to swing. Her mouth softened, the way a hand softens when it rests on a remembered shoulder. Yes, she said. What happened to him? She looked at me then, really looked, and the kitchen lamps made constellations in her eyes. He left, she said. He was very young, and the world was very loud, and the idea of being anywhere else was very bright. He said he would write. He said he would call. He did, for a while. Then the river bent itself too far and we couldn't see the water from here anymore. I stood very still. The house seemed to tilt a degree, the way you feel in your knees when a boat shifts. Is he? I couldn't say the word. Gone? We don't know, she said. Not knowing is its own weather. You learn to carry an umbrella and hang the laundry on the line regardless. Dad never talks about him, I said. Your father learned to keep the house from blowing away while I watched the road, she said. We each held something heavy. When you hold something for a long time, your hand shapes to it. You forget how to open your fingers. The clock in the hallway chimed, and we both startled, as if the house had agreed to the story and wanted to close the book for now. Grandma breathed, slow. She patted the fourth chair. Wash up, she said. Tell your father it's time. Dinner was gentle that night. It's hard to fight after the truth opens a window. We ate in companionable quiet. The fourth chair sat in its old place by the new light of what I knew. After, I lingered. Do you think he'll come back? I asked, feeling reckless with the hope the chair had planted in me. I think hope is a muscle, Grandma said. You use it or it wastes. She took my hand and squeezed. I am stronger in that arm than I have ever been. That night, the dreams changed. I didn't see the shadow or the handprint. I saw a road. It was the road to our house, but also not. The trees were taller, the sky closer, the fields furrowed with memory instead of crops. I was on the porch, a blanket around my shoulders. The air tasted like rain that hadn't fallen yet. Somewhere down the road, a figure was walking. They were too far to see. I knew, as one knows in dreams, that they had been walking a long time. Their steps were steady. They had something in their pocket, a letter that had been written and crumpled and smoothed, a photograph creased and mended with tape, a coin rubbed thin by thumb and year. I woke with the feeling that someone had spoken my name in a room I had just left. The next day at school, I could not hear the word chair without it ringing. In science, we learned about conduction, the way heat moves through a metal spoon if one end is in soup, and I thought about how the fourth place was hot with waiting and how the heat had moved into everything we touched. In reading, we read a chapter where a woman kept a candle in a window, and I wanted to stand up and say to the book, yes, exactly, but also a chair, and also the kind of salt you save for special occasions. In math, the teacher asked us to picture a set with an empty slot and tell her what belonged there. I put my head down on my desk and laughed until the worry that I might cry ran out of steam and went to sit under a tree. That evening, I did my homework at the corner of the table where I could watch the light climb the wall. Grandma hummed. Dad came home later than usual, his hair damp with the weather. He kissed the top of my head and went upstairs to change. Storm, he said on his way past, half to me, half to the house. On the ridge, coming fast. Storms come for their own reasons, Grandma said. We set a place regardless. I drew a chair in the margin of my math worksheet. 4 lines for legs. A rectangle for a seat. A back with a gentle curve for a spine. I shaded it in with careful strokes that darkened the paper until it looked like the memory of a chair pressed onto the page. When I looked up, the fourth chair sat where it always did, angling toward the window, patient as a lighthouse. And in my chest, a feeling like standing at a station and hearing the faint, far horn of a train. Not here yet. But coming. It began subtly, the way a story begins with a single line that seems harmless until the next line tilts it. Dinner was quiet that night. Dad had returned late, tired from the mill, and Grandma's stew had cooled twice on the stove before he arrived. Rain tapped against the window, soft at first, then harder, the way a drummer warms up before the march. We ate without much talk, just the scrape of spoons, the low groan of the wind pressing at the siding. My eyes kept sliding toward the empty chair, angled at its eternal degree, watching the world through the glass. Then it moved. Not far. Not enough that someone outside the family would have noticed. But I had been studying that chair for months, every notch in the wood, every polished stain of hand oil on its arms. I knew its position like I knew the lines on my own palms. And just then, between one blink and the next, it shifted, an inch, maybe two, scraping softly across the floor as though nudged by a careful hand. My spoon froze midair. The sound cut through me. Dad looked up. His face went still. Grandma didn't flinch. She reached for the salt and shook it lightly over her stew, then set the shaker down with the reverence of someone placing a candle on an altar. Not yet, she whispered, almost too softly to hear. My breath caught. Did you see that? I whispered. Dad's spoon clinked against the bowl. He forced a swallow. Eat, he said, voice thin. But Grandma just smiled faintly, eyes glistening with something not quite tears. Patience, she murmured. The road is long. The wind rattled the glass. I stared at the chair until my eyes blurred. That night I dreamed of footsteps in the hall. After that night, I couldn't leave the chair alone. I tried not to stare during meals, but my gaze pulled toward it, again and again, like a compass drawn to iron. My homework sprawled undone because I found myself sketching its outline in the margins, straight legs, curved back, arms polished with care. At night, I dreamed. Always the same road, always the same figure far in the distance. Sometimes they grew closer, but never enough for me to see their face. Sometimes the wind carried a voice, broken by distance, calling my name but never reaching my ears whole. At school, words floated past me like clouds. My teacher's voice became background noise. I kept thinking about the way the chair had scraped, the way Grandma had said not yet like it was the most natural thing in the world. One afternoon, I asked Dad. Do you believe? I said. He didn't look up from his newspaper. Believe what? That the person for the chair will come. The paper rustled. His jaw tightened. I believe in making peace, he said finally. Your grandmother believes in waiting. That's the difference. Which one's right? I asked. He folded the paper sharply, the sound like a door slamming. Maybe both. Maybe neither. You'll know when you're older. But I was tired of waiting to be older. I wanted to know now. That evening, I sat at the table early, before the dishes were set. I placed my hand on the back of the empty chair. The wood was cool, but not cold. Solid, but not lifeless. My fingers lingered there, as if I could feel a heartbeat beneath the grain. For a moment, I almost sat in it. Almost. But something in me recoiled, as though the chair would reject me. As though it belonged to someone else already. I pulled back quickly, heart racing. Grandma appeared in the doorway, her eyes soft but steady. Careful, she said. It's just a chair, I said, defensive. It's more than that, she said. It's a promise. And promises don't take kindly to being stolen. I swallowed hard. That night, I dreamed again, but this time the figure on the road raised a hand. The storm came in sudden, violent sheets. All afternoon, the sky had been restless, clouds swelling like bruises, wind curling around corners in fits. By dusk, the heavens split open. Rain slammed the windows hard enough to bow the panes, thunder rolled like drums of war, and lightning etched the world in white flashes. Grandma still set the table. Her hands trembled as she placed the fourth setting. Just slightly, but enough that I noticed. The knife clinked against the plate, the fork slid half an inch out of place. She corrected it with a trembling breath. Dad paced. He hated storms. He hated anything that reminded him how small we were. The ridge'll wash out, he muttered. Trees'll come down. It'll be a mess in the morning. But Grandma only said, the storm clears the air. When we sat, the candle on the table flickered violently, flame bowing low as though to greet someone. My eyes darted to the empty chair. The air around it shimmered. Not visibly, no glow, no ghost, but I felt it, like when you walk into a room and someone has just left, their warmth still in the air. I leaned forward, breath shallow. Do you feel that? Dad shifted uncomfortably. He glanced at the chair, then away, jaw tight. It's just the draft, he said. But Grandma's eyes softened. She laid her hand lightly on the tablecloth near the chair. Not yet, she whispered again. The storm hammered. Rain ran like rivers down the glass. The wind shrieked. And under all of it, I swore I heard it, breathing. Slow, steady, right where no one sat. Thunder crowded the rafters. Lightning stitched white veins through the window. The storm had taken the house in its mouth and was testing our bones. We ate in a hush that wasn't silence. It was the kind of hush a theater gets right before the curtain lifts, breath stacked, muscles braced, eyes learning how to be wider. The candle strained, bowing, recovering, bowing again. The fourth chair waited, angled toward the window like a compass needle set to true. Dad reached for the bread and missed the basket by a little, his hand unsteady with weather and worry. Grandma's ladle tapped the rim of the soup pot, 1, 2, 3, as if counting a heartbeat back from panic. I was listening the way you listen for your name in a crowd, for a footstep you swear you know. And then the house went still, as if whoever tells storms where to stand had raised a finger and said, hush. The knock came like a memory. Not loud. Not frantic. 3 measured taps. The kind you make when you know the door knows you. My spoon froze halfway to my mouth. Broth sloshed and burned my knuckles. Dad's head snapped toward the hall. The candle stuttered, recovered. Grandma's chair scraped back. She stood without hurry, but not slowly either, her body moving with the knowledge it had rehearsed 1,000 nights. She smoothed her apron with one palm, the fabric already smooth. She touched the fourth chair, just the top rail, just her fingertips, like a priest touches water before a blessing. Don't, Dad said, too sharp, fear making a blade of his voice. Ma, wait. We can't just, it's time, she said. He swallowed so hard I heard it. He glanced at me, and in that glance I saw a dozen fathers, the one who lifted me over puddles when I was small, the one who worked through fevers so winter wouldn't get its hands on us, the one who had taught himself how to carry silence like a log across a creek. He shook his head once. Stay here, he said to me. I did not say that staying was impossible. I did not say that I could feel the road in my pulse. I did not say that the knocking, which had stopped, had not ended, it was still happening in the walls. Grandma stepped into the hall. The house shifted its weight to follow her, boards creaking with the sort of tenderness you don't expect from wood. The hallway light clicked on. Her shadow went long along the runner. She reached the door and rested her hand on the knob like you might rest your hand on the shoulder of someone who'd come a long way. For a heartbeat, she didn't turn it. She closed her eyes. Her mouth moved, and though no sound carried to us, I knew the shape of the words. Thank you for the waiting. Thank you for the coming. She opened the door. Wind should have rushed in. Rain should have flung itself across the threshold. But the storm paused as if it had reached the edge of a churchyard. Only the smell of wet road entered, stone, mud, leaves bruised into sweetness, the metallic promise of lightning. A figure stood there, a dark cutout against the night. Taller than Dad by a head. Coat soaked. Hat pulled low, water running from its brim in 2 steady streams. A canvas bag slung on one shoulder, the strap biting a notch into the coat. Shoes the color of old coffee, caked in what an entire county's worth of miles looks like when the world stops being map and starts being boots. Grandma did something with her face I had only seen in dreams. She let it be unguarded. Everything she had held back to keep the house standing fell forward and lit her features from within. She didn't cry. The crying had been done, in installments, over years. What she did was breathe like someone who has reached the surface. "Hello, Ma," the figure said. "Ma." Dad's chair made a sound like a warning and a prayer. He was standing before he knew he'd stood, a man fighting the urge to run toward and run away at once. His hands had forgotten what to do with themselves. They flexed empty, found the back of a chair, gripped it, let go. Grandma didn't reach out. Not yet. She had always been good with first moments. "You're late," she said, and the words were a benediction. The figure tipped his hat back. Lightning flashed and put his face on the wall behind him for a split second, hollows where flesh had fled to make way for miles, beard salt and pepper like the road had dusted him and decided to stay, eyes that had learned to keep looking in the direction of home even when the horizon went missing. He was older than the last photo on the mantel by the number of years you don't want to count when you measure loss. He was younger than sorrow sometimes let him be. "I know," he said. "I brought 1,000 apologies. They don't weigh what they should." Grandma's mouth trembled. "They weigh enough to make you bow your head," she said. "Come in." He stepped across the threshold. Water emptied itself onto the mat. He reached for the hat, paused, lowered his hand instead. There are rituals you do not rush. Dad couldn't make his feet move. His jaw worked. His eyes were knives and rain and boy, all at once. He said nothing. He had kept his throat clear for years by saying nothing. The figure looked past Grandma and found him. He didn't smile. He didn't ask for permission that could not be granted. He said his name, my father's name, like a test, like a plea, like a proof. "Eli," he said. Dad flinched. The name touched him like a hand does when it knows exactly where the bruise is. He blinked hard. Grandma glanced between them, the hallway lamp gilding her profile. "Take off your coat," she said to the man in the doorway, and then, to the house, to us, to the years, "You're home." Lightning went white across the window. Thunder followed with a deep, exhausted growl, like a great animal surrendering. "Ma," Dad said. One syllable, cracked open. He took one step, then another. He stopped an arm's length away, fingers flexing at his sides. If he couldn't finish the sentence. "I am," the man said, not moving to close the distance, the humility of a long absence holding him in place. "I'm the one who left. I'm the one who didn't write enough. I'm the one who kept thinking I'd make it back when I had a win to bring, not just hands and a bag and a story that got lost. I'm the one who," his voice filed the edge off the words so they could pass. "I'm sorry." Dad's throat moved. The house waited. The clock in the hall chimed half a minute late, like it had been so busy listening it forgot its job. "Come to the table," Grandma said, not breaking eye contact with either of her sons. "It's hot enough still." "It will be hot enough." The man nodded once. He lifted the bag strap over his head and set the bag gently beside the door, as if it contained a bird. He unlaced his coat, the sound of wet fabric releasing itself from its own grip startlingly loud. He hung it on the peg that had waited for it so long the peg had worn a dent of longing into the wall. He stepped toward the dining room, and I saw his eyes catch on the 4th place. For the first time, his mouth lifted at one corner, a smile built from gratitude and disbelief and the knowledge of what it costs to keep a chair. "That for me?" he asked softly. Grandma didn't answer with words. She ran her palm over the back rail, smoothing what didn't need smoothing, and stepped aside. He walked in. He didn't sit right away. He stood at the edge of the light and let the room climb around him, the table, the candle, the bowls lined up like witnesses who had promised not to speak out of turn. His eyes went to the window by instinct, the way a person who has been without walls checks for sky the moment they feel enclosed. Rain sheeted down the glass. In the reflection, I could see him and Grandpa's portrait stacked for a heartbeat, two men wearing the same bones 80% the same way. Grandma took her seat. Dad remained standing, hands on the back of his chair, knuckles white. I stayed where I was, half sitting, half rising, a spring waiting for permission to become a leap. The man's gaze dropped to the fourth setting, the silver fork and knife, the napkin folded with the careful arrogance of ceremony, the plate centered like a target you hit by living long enough to deserve it. He swallowed. His throat worked around a lot of years. I dreamed about this chair, he said, voice almost level. On nights when I was sure I didn't have a name left anywhere. I dreamed it was here, stubborn as the morning, shining like the metal it is. I dreamed if I ever saw it again, the worst thing I'd have to do would be sit. Grandma's hands had folded themselves without her looking. She unfolded them. Sitting is the easiest part, she said. The rest is eating and telling the truth. He nodded as if he had expected that exact price. Dad found his voice where he had left it last, at the edge of a blade. If you're here to take anything, he said, not quite snarling, not quite pleading, you should know it's all been claimed. There's nothing left of you to collect. The man took the blow and did not defend against it. I'm not here to take, he said quietly. I've done enough of that by being gone. He lifted his hands a few inches, palms open. I brought only what I carried out and couldn't put down. What's in the bag? I asked, because children say the thing that gets the story moving. He half turned his head, considering whether to answer the child or keep parrying the man. He decided to do both. Maps that are wrong, he said to me. Letters I never mailed. A photograph I folded so much it's become a prayer. A tin of buttons I started collecting when I needed proof things could hold. A shirt. A book. A pair of socks with more holes than you'd think possible. A stone from the river that runs past the town before this one, so I'd know the river remembered me even if the town didn't. Dad's jaw worked at letters I never mailed. He closed his eyes. I had never seen him close his eyes when he was standing. It made him look like someone who had been told to put his sword down and had obeyed but didn't know what to do with his hands. Sit, Grandma said gently. You, too, she added to Dad, and her voice softened into the sound your chest makes when you finally let go of a breath you didn't know you were holding. The man moved to the chair. He placed one palm on the back rail. He didn't press. He didn't claim. He asked, with his hand. The chair didn't answer, not in any way you could see. It answered in the way the room took his weight, the way the candle straightened as if it had been hunched without noticing. He pulled the chair back, and here was the sound I had been hearing in my sleep for weeks, the soft hush of wood on wood, the scrape of return. He sat. Nothing exploded. No ghost flew out of the cupboard to applaud. The storm didn't end with a theatrical flourish. But the room got warmer by a measure you would need a grandmother to detect. Grandma ladled stew into his bowl. Her hand shook once and then steadied as if memory had put its palm over hers. She set the bowl before him. He looked at it like he wasn't sure you were allowed to look at food before you earned it. Eat, she said, and I heard the entire history of that word in her mouth. Eat and grow, eat and stay, eat and forgive, eat and be forgiven. He lifted the spoon. He tasted. He closed his eyes at the first mouthful like it had spelled his name from the inside out. When he opened them, they were wet and less far away. Still too much time, he said, a smile attempting itself and failing and trying again. You were always reckless with time. Grandma snorted, a sound I hadn't heard since before Grandpa died, a sound that suggested the world was ridiculous, survivable, beloved. And you were always a critic, she said, which was the same as saying I know you. Dad sat, finally. He didn't touch his bowl. His eyes were on the stranger who was not a stranger at all. His breathing had learned a new rhythm and wasn't sure it liked it. I didn't mean to say what I said next. I think the house used my mouth because it needed the question out in the air. Why did you leave? He put the spoon down. He considered answering the child with the child's version of the truth. He didn't. He picked up the grown-up truth and measured whether we could hold it. Because I thought there was something I needed that wasn't here, he said, speaking to all of us and none of us. Because the walls felt close and the road felt wide. Because I had a fight with your father and I wanted to win at a life where no one could make me wrong. Because I mistook distance for destiny. Because pride is a horse that will run until your joints turn to fire if you don't climb off. He exhaled slowly. Because sometimes the only way you learn where you belong is by becoming a stranger in every place that isn't it. Dad's hands had moved to the table without his permission. One was flat on the wood, the other closed around the edge of his plate as if he needed proof that edges held. He kept his gaze down. And why come back now? He asked. His voice was quieter, more dangerous, the tone of someone walking across a river on stones and refusing to look at the water. The man nodded, as if he'd known that question would be waiting in the fourth setting. Because I ran out of road that didn't circle back here, he said. Because the map in my pocket kept turning into a photograph of this window. Because I was tired of telling my story without the part where I was wrong. He swallowed. Because I heard the chair move. The skin on my arms went tight. Dad looked up sharply. Grandma's mouth parted, surprise opening a clean door inside it. You heard, she said. I dreamt it first, years ago, he said, the words coming faster now that they had somewhere to go. Night after night, I'd be in some room that wasn't mine, and I'd hear a chair scrape the way it does when you pull it out for someone you love. I'd wake up sure I'd left a place unfilled. Then, on nights when I slept like a stone, I'd wake with a stripe on my palm, he showed us, an old pale line running from thumb to wrist, as if I'd been gripping wood. I told myself it was foolishness. I told myself it was the past asking for rent. And then, a week ago, I heard it while I was awake. He paused, checking whether we believed in this sort of story. The room had already decided it did. In a diner off the highway, he went on. Rain on the windows. The kind of coffee that tastes like it was brave once and forgot. I heard it, clear, domestic, inevitable. A chair being pulled back from a table with love and history and room enough for me to fail and still be allowed to sit. He looked at Grandma. I paid the bill. I started walking. Grandma pressed her fingers to her lips. Her shoulders shook once, the body remembering how to cry but opting to let the shaking be enough. Dad sat very still. The muscles in his jaw let go one by one. When he spoke again, the blade had been sheathed. You could have called, he said. There was no accusation left in the sentence, only the record of how many times he had said it to the dark. I know, the man said. I didn't know how to be the person who deserved to be heard at the other end. Then I realized being deserving wasn't the door. Love was. So I knocked. We were quiet a while. The storm ratcheted down. The candle held steady. Grandma reached for the bread and passed it to him the way you pass bread in church, believing in the miracle that small things can be enough if you call them by their true names. He tore a piece, careful, as if the loaf was old bones. He ate. He swallowed. He breathed. I watched Dad's hand move an inch toward the middle of the table, then another inch, then stop. The man watched without seeming to. He moved his own hand an inch. Neither reached. But the inches were a bridge. Will you stay? I asked, hating the way my voice wobbled, not caring that it did. He didn't answer quickly. He didn't make promises the weather could blow away. He looked at the bag by the door. He looked at the chair he sat in. He looked at my father, at my grandmother, at the window where the world's face pressed soft against the glass. If I'm wanted, he said. Grandma's laugh was one part joy and one part scold. I set a place, she said. For years. Do you think I did that for theater? A smile found its footing on his face and stood. He looked at Dad. Dad's eyes were old and young at once. We eat first, he said, a compromise and a covenant. We talk after. Fair, the man said. We ate. Not much was said because eating is its own language. When the bowls were less heavy, when the candle had burned down enough to remind us that time moves even in miracle, the man reached down and lifted the canvas bag onto his lap. He undid the buckle and drew out a photograph, edges silvered by handling. He slid it across the table. Grandma's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's fingers stopped short of touching the picture by the width of a breath. It was the four of them, Grandma, Grandpa, Dad as a teenager who didn't know how handsome he was, and the man beside him, younger, head tilted, mouth ready to laugh, one arm slung around Dad's shoulders like ownership and promise both. The fourth chair ghosted in the background even then, angled toward the window, waiting before it had to. I kept it, the man said. Even when I thought I was done keeping anything. No one moved. The house listened to itself. Finally, Grandma rose. She went to the sideboard and opened the drawer where she kept the good things, the corkscrew that had belonged to her mother, the tiny sugar tongs shaped like a bird's beak, the handkerchief ironed so sharply it could cut. She set out 3 small glasses and a fourth. The bottle of something amber appeared as if the storm had delivered it. She poured. She slid a glass to Dad, one to me with only a swallow in it and a raised eyebrow that said "Don't tell your teacher," one to the man. She kept one for herself. To the road, she said, lifting hers, for not winning. She looked at the man. To your stubborn life, for surviving itself. She looked at Dad. To the son who stayed and the son who returned. She looked at me. To the witness. We touched rims lightly. We drank. The storm, hearing it was not the most interesting thing in the house anymore, wandered off to bother the far hills. The window was only rain now, not judgment. The candle's wick made a small sound as it moved down through what was left to burn. The chair that had waited was occupied. The air around it felt right the way your own sweater does when you pull it on from the line and it still smells like sun. The table was 4 again. The clock in the hallway, which had been a second behind for years, chimed the hour on time. We laughed, the kind of laugh families do when the world throws them a joke and a miracle in the same night and they don't know which to thank first. Dessert, Grandma announced suddenly, clapping her hands once, ferocious with relief. Good heavens, I nearly forgot dessert. You never forget dessert, Dad said, startled into smiling. I forgot it alone, she said briskly, heading for the kitchen. I won't forget it together. The man watched her go, then turned to Dad. Eli, he said again, less like a plea this time and more like a string he was testing to see if it would hold. I'm here. Dad's mouth worked. He did not reach across the table. He did not stand. He said, quietly, I see you. It was not everything. It was the right first thing. The candle guttered once and steadied. The window let the night be night. The house, which had been holding its breath for years, let it out and didn't rush to take the next one. We sat, for where there had been 3 and a ghost. And for the first time since the ritual began, the chair under the window was not waiting. It was keeping. The storm had moved on, but the house still hummed with its echo. Candles guttered low, their wax pooling like melted memory. Plates sat half empty, spoons abandoned mid-thought. And still, no one spoke. The man, the missing son, the brother, the shadow who had stepped into flesh again, rested his palms on the table as if anchoring himself. He looked at Dad, at Eli, not blinking, not flinching. I know what I took, he said finally. His voice was low, not for secrecy but for reverence. When I left, I didn't just take myself. I took the map you had of family, and I burned a hole through it. I left you to patch it while I wandered. I thought the world owed me answers. All it did was give me questions I couldn't carry. Dad stared, rigid as the table itself. His lips pressed thin, colorless. Do you think saying that is enough? No, the man said at once. If words could be enough, I'd have written them all those years ago. If words were enough, I wouldn't be here. I'd have stayed gone, safe in silence. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing like a buoy in rough water. But I'm here because I can't live with a chair set for me and not fill it. Not anymore. Grandma exhaled, trembling. Her hands, folded on the table, unfurled slowly like wings rediscovering how to move. Dad's fist hit the wood, sharp, sudden. I jumped. We buried you, he spat. His voice cracked in the middle, split between rage and grief. Not in the ground, but in our lives. Every day, we buried you. We had to, or we couldn't keep going. And now you just, he broke off, teeth grinding. You just walk in? The man didn't raise his voice. You think I don't know the cost? I felt it every mile. I carried it in every silence that should have been a phone call, in every bed I laid in where no one knew my name. But if I stayed gone, then the cost was wasted. At least if I came back, his eyes burned, wet. The chair would mean something. The room pulsed with that truth. Grandma reached across, her fingers brushing Dad's wrist. Eli, she said softly, anger is love with a wound. Don't let the wound speak louder than the love. Dad's jaw trembled. His eyes met hers, then dropped. He pressed both hands flat on the table as if surrendering to its solidness. The man's hand twitched, barely moving. I don't ask forgiveness, he said. I ask for room. Just room. Silence held. Heavy, trembling, but not breaking. Then Dad let out a sound, half laugh, half sob. He shook his head. You sound just like him, he muttered. Like Dad. Always asking for room when you'd already taken all of it. But his voice had softened. His shoulders had lowered. And the words weren't a door slamming, they were a door creaking open. Grandma's eyes closed, tears spilling finally, decades too late. Then take the room, she whispered. It's always been yours. The man bowed his head, shoulders sagging like a weight had finally slid off. The chair had done its job. The days that followed were strange in the way healing always is, awkward, tender, uneven. The man stayed. He slept in the spare room that had long been an archive of boxes and linens, air heavy with cedar. Grandma cleared the dresser, one drawer at a time, humming the whole while. At breakfast, his voice joined ours, uncertain at first, then steady. At chores, he picked up tools like he'd never left, though his hands were calloused differently now, shaped by other labors, other places. At night, the fourth chair was no longer empty. For me, it was like stepping into a story mid-chapter, learning the characters had been written long before I could read. For Dad, it was harder. His eyes followed his brother constantly, a mix of disbelief, suspicion, and longing. Sometimes he spoke sharp words, old grievances pulled up like weeds. Other times, he said nothing, but I caught him watching, his mouth softening, like maybe memory wasn't only pain. One evening, Grandma caught me staring at the chair again, now filled. She touched my shoulder. See, she said gently. Promises kept don't always look the way you expect. But they still keep. I nodded. The man looked up from his bowl. His eyes met mine. Thank you, he said. For what? I asked, startled. For watching the chair, he said simply. For believing someone belonged there, even when no one told you who. That kind of seeing, it keeps people alive. My chest swelled, tight and proud all at once. I looked at Grandma. She smiled, her hand warm on my shoulder. The days grew into weeks. The storm's wreckage outside was cleared, but inside, the storm's gift remained. The missing had become present, the empty had become full. And one night, weeks later, when the table was set again, Grandma placed 4 plates as always. She touched the 4th chair out of habit. But this time, she smiled differently, not wistful, not weary, but content. The man reached across the table, steadying her hand with his own. You don't have to set it for me anymore, he said softly. I'm here. Grandma's eyes shone. "I'll set it anyway," she said. Not out of hope now, but out of gratitude. We laughed, light breaking across the table like sun after rain. Dinner was noisy that night, overlapping voices and clattering spoons. The house felt full in a way it hadn't in decades. And I thought about all the nights I had watched that chair, about the ache of waiting, the mystery, the dreams. About how love sometimes looks like an empty space held open against reason, against years, against silence. The chair was no longer empty. But the lesson of it remained: to keep space, to keep hope, to keep love even when the world calls it foolish. That night, before bed, I whispered to the quiet house, the way I had on so many lonely nights before, just in case. Only this time, the house answered with laughter drifting up the stairs, with voices overlapping, with the steady rhythm of belonging. And from that night on, the chair was never empty again.